Inside an exclusive country club, Elise Morgan, a calm and powerful black CEO, is openly humiliated by the wealthy Sanderson family in front of silent witnesses. She stays composed, responds with a sharp line that flips the room's energy, and hints she holds far more power than they know. The chapter ends on a tense cliffhanger promising revenge. "We don't sit with people like you." The words sliced through laughter and the muted clink of wine glasses inside the Oak Ridge Country Club's oldest dining hall. For a moment, the violins playing by the fireplace felt like mockery. At the center of it all sat Elise Morgan, back straight, her tailored black suit absorbing the warm chandelier light like a shield. She didn't flinch. Across from her, Douglas Sanderson III leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, swirling his brandy. The patriarch's lips curled into a practiced smirk. His wife, Martha, clutched her pearls, glancing around to be sure the other families heard every word. Their grown son, Bradley, let out a sharp laugh, too loud, too eager to prove he was his father's echo. He knocked over his water glass. It spilled across the linen tablecloth, pooling near Elise's plate. No one moved to help. Not the waiters, young black servers who stood frozen at the room's edge. Not the couples at nearby tables who held their breath to taste the scandal. In the air, Douglas's voice cut through again. "Maybe your kind have their own club somewhere downtown. You'd feel more comfortable." Elise studied him. She could feel the manager near the bar, pretending not to see. A couple in evening gowns whispered behind napkins. She could even hear the quiet hum of the old ceiling fans, the same fans that turned above this room 70 years ago when men like Douglas's grandfather refused to let her grandfather through the front door. A single droplet from the spilled glass slid across her napkin, staining it dark. Elise calmly dabbed it away, her ring catching the light. A simple gold band, no diamonds, but older than the club itself. She slowly rose. Her chair scraped back, a hush louder than any insult. Elise reached into her purse, pulled out a thick white envelope stamped with a golden crest. Douglas watched, half amused, half curious, until Elise tore it cleanly in half. Paper cracked, fluttered down like confetti on a party no one wanted to attend. Gasps flared from every corner of the hall. Douglas's smile twitched. "What do you think you're doing?" Elise's eyes swept over the frozen waiters, the manager. Pretending to polish a glass, the couples who looked at her like she was a stain they couldn't scrub out. Then back to Douglas, a man so sure the room was his fortress. She stepped close enough that he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes, calm, patient, like a mother correcting a child. "Tomorrow," she said softly, but the words carried. "To every ear, you'll wish you'd begged to sit with me." Douglas's wife clutched his arm. Bradley's smirk fell flat. Somewhere someone's phone camera clicked, a witness for what was coming. Elise turned, her heels clicking on marble, echoing like gunshots in the hush. As the doors swung open, the cold night air met her cheeks like freedom. Behind her, the Oak Ridge Country Club swallowed its secrets, pretending they hadn't just spat on the wrong woman. The sun rose over Sanderson and Co.'s headquarters like an accusation. Glass windows glared down at the city's waking streets, cold and reflective, much like Douglas Sanderson III when he finally saw the news. He sat alone in his study, oak panels swallowing the first light of day. His fingers trembled around a silver letter opener as he skimmed the front page of the Financial Times. Morgan Industries in final talks for $500 million Sanderson merger. Elise Morgan, CEO, steps in personally. Douglas read the line twice, then once. More, as if his eyes might have betrayed him. Elise Morgan, the same woman he'd brushed aside like lint on his jacket. The same woman whose envelope now lay shredded on the club's dining room floor. Martha entered behind him, robe cinched. Tight, coffee untouched in her hand. Douglas, what does this mean? He didn't answer. Couldn't dot an hour later, the Sanderson boardroom pulsed with forced calm. Heavy glass doors sealed in the smell of stale coffee and nervous cologne. Leather chairs squeaked under shifting. Bodies. Bradley perched at his father's right, hair slicked back too tight, shadows under his eyes betraying the whiskey he'd drowned in after the club. He'd bragged about how they'd put her in her place. Now he shifted every time Elise's name left someone's lips. The CFO cleared his throat, eyes darting to the floor. Sir, Ms. Morgan's been negotiating this merger quietly for 8 months. She asked for direct oversight. No intermediaries. Douglas slammed his palm on the table. The sound ricocheted off the glass walls. So we're just supposed to let this woman dictate how this family does business. Bradley forced a laugh weak. Dad, it's not like she can. The door swung open. Conversation choked off as Elise entered. Black suit. No jewelry but a slim watch at her wrist. Not a hair out of place. She didn't acknowledge Douglas's glare. She didn't need to. She just slid her laptop from a leather case and placed it on the table, the click of its clasp louder than any greeting. Good morning, she said, voice smooth as black coffee. Shall we? Douglas leaned forward, claws hidden behind clasped hands. Ms. Morgan last night. She held up one hand, a command more than a gesture. The entire table froze. Mr. Sanderson, she said evenly, eyes flicking from father to son. Before you try to explain last night, don't. The CFO dropped his pen. Someone cleared their throat but fell silent when she turned her eyes on them. I don't need apologies. Elisa's voice was so calm it burned. I need numbers and honesty. And your signatures on a contract that does not lie. Bradley tried to recover, leaning in. We can put this behind us, Ms. Morgan. We're all professionals here. She smiled then, small, polite, merciless. Are we? She pressed a button on her laptop. A projection flickered to life on the frosted glass wall. Rows of figures. Debts, hidden subsidiary losses. The Sanderson empire, stripped of its gold trim and laid bare in bullet points and red lines. A low murmur. Douglas's fingers drummed the table. He recognized half those numbers, the half they'd hidden under legal fog for years. You see, Elise continued, folding her hands, when you spend decades pretending people like me aren't at your table, you forget we build our own. And then we buy yours. No one spoke. Outside the boardroom's glass walls, junior associates passed by, eyes darting at the tension humming through the tinted glass. Inside, the Sandersons sat trapped, hostages of their own arrogance. Elise closed her laptop with a soft click. I'll give you until tomorrow to read this properly, she said, standing. Then we'll discuss new terms. You may find they're different from the old ones. She paused at the door. Her reflection in the polished metal handle caught Bradley's eyes. He looked like a boy who'd woken up in the wrong house. Oh, and Douglas, she said, almost as an afterthought. He raised his eyes, desperate to salvage dignity. Next. Time you think about where I sit, Elise said, voice low and sharp. Remember, I choose who sits at all. And then she was gone, leaving the room colder than when she'd entered, but somehow far more awake. The next morning, the Sanderson estate sat in a heavy hush, as if the paintings lining the hallway walls knew shame for the first time. Douglas stood by the window in his private study, staring past the manicured lawn to where the gate stood, iron bars guarding old money from the world outside. But he couldn't keep whispers out. Not anymore. His phone buzzed again. Another reporter. Another headline. Black CEO humiliated by billionaire family. Retaliates with $500 million power play. It wasn't just gossip. It was poison, seeping. Into boardrooms, investor calls, country club locker rooms. He turned to Martha, perched stiffly on the couch, phone clutched to her chest. Her voice trembled through her pearls. "Douglas, we have to say something. Deny it. Spin it. Something." But Douglas knew spin wouldn't work this time. Elise hadn't spoken to the press. She didn't need to. The silence made the story. Grow teeth. People believed what they wanted to believe. And secretly, they liked seeing a lion brought down by the very prey he'd mocked. Bradley barged in without knocking. Suit half-buttoned, hair sticking up where he'd yanked it in frustration. He tossed his tablet onto the antique coffee table, the screen still glowing with the news site headline, "Dad, the board is panicking. If Morgan walks, we're done. You know that." His voice cracked at the edges, the mask of privilege slipping. Douglas's jaw flexed. She won't walk. But even he didn't believe it. Elise Morgan had walked into his fortress and made it clear. The door swung only when she wanted it to. The next day, Elise arrived at Sanderson & Co. in a simple gray coat, her presence more commanding than any entourage. As she stepped through the glass lobby, the receptionist straightened her posture. The junior staff glanced up from their screens, eyes wide. They'd all heard the rumors how Douglas Sanderson, 3 had tried to humiliate her at the Oak Ridge Club, how she'd stood up without raising her voice, how she now held their futures. Between her calm fingers, the elevator ride to the top floor was silent but electric. Elise caught her own reflection in the polished doors. No hint of the tiredness that pressed behind her eyes at night when the world went quiet. She'd learned long ago that the world only respected armor, not the skin beneath. The boardroom was already full when she walked in, senior partners, the CFO, 2 outside lawyers with forced smiles. Douglas and Bradley sat side by side, pale, but postured, hoping to project strength they no longer had. Elise didn't sit right away. She walked to the long window behind Douglas's chair, looking down at the city below, a chessboard. She'd been studying since she was young enough to see how kings were just men in better suits. She turned, voice steady. "Before we continue, any other surprises I should know about? Off-the-books holdings? Pending lawsuits?" No one spoke. Only the tick of the antique clock broke the hush. She leaned forward, resting her hands on the chair opposite Douglas. "Because the next time something hidden crawls into my ledger," she said softly, "the deal's off. I won't buy rot. I'll bury it." Douglas's jaw twitched. He forced a nod, a man who'd never bent for anyone, forced to bow in front of the same people he once pretended not to see. That evening, Bradley found Elise alone in the company's quiet top-floor lounge. Floor-to-ceiling windows painted the city in orange dusk. He hovered by the bar. "Fake casual. Double quotes, Ms. Morgan," he started, voice tight. I wanted to say I'm sorry about that night." She didn't look up from the view. "No, you're not," Bradley flinched. The whiskey glass in his hand trembled. "I mean it." "If I'd known who you were," Elise turned then, her calm eyes cutting him mid-sentence. "And if I hadn't been who I am?" she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it. His apology died like a moth in a jar. She stepped closer, so close he could see the faint scar near her temple, a childhood accident he'd read about in her old interviews but never really seen on her perfect face. It made her more real than any boardroom rumor. "Tell your father," Elise said softly, "that I'm not here to shame him in front of the world." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But I will." And with that, she stepped past him, her heels quiet against the marble, her shadow long and unbothered by the ruins she left behind. Maplewood Avenue looked smaller than Elise remembered. The cracked sidewalk still buckled in the same places, as if the earth itself refused to be smoothed over. She stepped out of the back seat of her town car alone. No assistant, no briefcase, no armor. just Elise Morgan, daughter of Raymond Morgan, who once fixed broken locks and splintered doors in this very block. The hardware store was long gone now, its windows boarded up, faded letters ghosted on. The brick, Morgan's Fix-It Shop. The new sign above read coming soon. Luxury condos. A promise or a threat, depending on who you asked. She walked to the rusted gate, traced her finger over the old mailbox slot. She could almost see her father behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, laughing with the neighborhood kids who'd swarm in after school to steal candy and leave with fresh batteries they didn't pay for. He never chased them out, he'd say. Better they steal light than stay in the dark. A voice broke her memory. Miss Morgan? She turned. A man stood by the chain-link fence, shoulders stooped but eyes bright. Mr. Halvorsen, the barber who used to sweep her up in his arms when her father worked late. His hair was thinner now, smile just as wide. Elise? He said again, disbelief softening his rough tone. You're taller than I remember, she laughed, a real laugh that startled even her. And you're smaller. He held open the gate. They stepped over the patchy grass where her father once parked his old Chevy truck, the one he fixed every Sunday so he wouldn't owe anyone for a ride come Monday. They talked inside the shell of the old shop, standing where the cash register used to sit. Halvorsen told her how the block had changed, or hadn't, really. The bank loans never came. The big stores moved in and sucked the small ones dry. A liquor store replaced the old pharmacy. The bakery was gone. But the people still nodded at each other on porches that leaned like tired old men. She listened. She always did. It was her father's gift and his curse. He'd listen until he knew exactly what was broken. Then he'd fix it. Halvorsen looked at her hands as she traced the counter's splintered edge. Your father would be proud of you, standing up to them. Not bowing your head. Elise felt the weight of the word proud. It pressed into her chest like a thumb against glass. Thin enough to break if she let it. He'd say it's not enough. Yet, she murmured outside. A group of teens biked past, music blaring from a cracked speaker. One boy popped a wheelie, shouting her father's name like an old ghost. Old Man Morgan could fix anything. She stepped outside as they passed. Sunlight catching on her watch, the only thing she wore that cost more than her father ever made in 10 years. She wondered if that was pride or betrayal. Halvorsen watched her eyes drift. Don't forget where you're from, Elise, or who you're fixing it for. She nodded, looking at the rotting sign one last time. Coming soon. She'd make sure. It did. But not for people who'd slam doors like Douglas Sanderson did. Back in her car, the city slipped by in smudged reflections on tinted glass. Her phone buzzed. A text from her general counsel. Douglas wants a private meeting. Urgent. She stared at the message, thumb hovering. Outside, a group of women waited at a bus stop, clutching grocery bags, children hanging off tired hips. Elise thought of her father's hands, rough, cracked, unyielding. She thought of how he'd built a counter sturdy enough to lean on when the world pushed too hard. Fix what's broken. He'd say, break what thinks it can't be fixed. She typed back, tell him I'll see him tomorrow. My office. Not his dot. She dropped the phone in her bag, leaned her head back, and let the city lights flicker across her closed eyes. Not an ending, not yet. Just the creak of old wood under her shoes as she built a new door. Douglas Sanderson III had never waited for anyone in his life. Not in line at the bank, not at the country club valet, not even for a judge's ruling. But here he was, sitting alone in Elise Morgan's glass-walled office. While she kept him waiting on purpose, the view behind him stretched across the city like a crown he could no longer wear. It mocked him in the reflection, a king who'd lost his throne but still wore the robes. He checked his watch for the third time, tapping his wedding ring against the armrest. 15 minutes late. deliberate. He knew it, and she knew he knew it. When Elise finally walked in, she didn't rush. She didn't apologize. She set her phone down, removed her coat, and sat across from him in silence, as if the chair itself might confess secrets if she waited long enough. Douglas cleared his throat first. "Ms. Morgan, Elise," she corrected calmly. "If we're going to be honest today, use my name." He nodded, licking dry lips. "Elise, then. Look, we both know this. Situation has gotten out of hand. The press is having a field day. Investors are skittish. And I know you don't want that either." She said nothing, only folded her hands over her knee, waiting, watching him sweat. He tried again, voice lower, leaning forward like a man begging for a loan. "You're smart. You know our families, our companies, we're stronger together. This merger is good for both of us. We can clean this up, quietly, privately." Elise's gaze drifted to the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Reflected. There, the faint outline of a cameraman outside, the press camped by the revolving door. The world wasn't private anymore. It hadn't been for years. "You think you control what stays private," she said softly. "But you don't, not anymore." Douglas's jaw tightened. "So you want a spectacle? Humiliation? That helps no one, Elise." A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Maybe pity, maybe amusement. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder. She slid it across the table. "Read it." He opened it. Lines of numbers, transaction records, old audit reports he thought buried, and taped neatly to the last page. A blurry photo. Douglas's signature on a contract that funneled millions from an old pension fund into a private island. Project that had quietly failed years ago. He looked up sharply. His breath caught halfway to a protest. Elise didn't gloat. Her voice was flat, even tired. "You once said people like me don't belong at your table, but you forgot who builds the table, who polishes it, who files the paperwork you don't read." Douglas pushed the folder back like it was poisoned. "What do you want?" She leaned in, her eyes narrowing just enough to cut him to size. "Your silence, your signature, and your seat." He blinked. "My seat? Step down as chairman? Retire early. Publicly, with gratitude, of course. The family name stays clean. You get your payout, your grandchildren keep the houses, the cars, the club membership, but you don't get this seat anymore." Douglas's chest heaved under his bespoke suit, decades of unchallenged power cracking in his throat. "You can't." "Oh, but I can," Elise said, voice barely above a whisper. "I can call the press conference right now. Or you can step outside, stand next to me, and lie to them about how this was your idea. How you're leaving a legacy of integrity." He laughed, sharp, broken, desperate. "And you think they'll believe that?" She smiled then, a slow curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "They'll believe what I let them see." Douglas slumped back, eyes glazed. The window reflection showed him what the room really looked like, a fortress-turned glass box. And the woman across from him wasn't a guest anymore. She was the landlord. A soft knock at the door. Elise's assistant stepped in, holding a tablet. "Ms. Morgan, the press is ready whenever you are." Douglas's eyes flicked to the door, then back to Elise. In that breathless hush, a lifetime of pride crumbled like dry plaster. "Fine," he croaked. "I'll do it." Elise stood, gathering the folder. "Of course you will," she said. "Because it was your idea, remember?" She left him there in the glass cage of his own making. The press outside, already hungry for the soundbite that would turn his kingdom into her footnote. The cameras were already waiting when Douglas stepped onto the small stage. Dozens of lenses blinked and whirred, a pack of hungry eyes ready to feast on a king brought to his knees. Elise stood at his side, a sleek black microphone clipped to her blazer. The backdrop behind them bore both company logos in crisp harmony, a symbolic marriage more binding than any signature on paper. Douglas adjusted his tie, cleared his throat. He looked smaller in daylight, the winter sun revealing deep lines in his skin, a tremor in his left hand he could no longer hide. He leaned toward the mic, eyes darting to Elise for a cue. She didn't give him one. He had to jump alone. Good. "Afternoon," Douglas began, voice dry as paper. "I want to thank you all for being here on such short notice. It's been an honor to lead Sanderson & Co. for over 30 years. But the time has come for me to step down, to pass the torch to the next generation of leaders who will guide us forward." Flashes popped like tiny explosions. Reporters scribbled, some smirking. Already knowing this wasn't the story Douglas thought he was telling, he forced a smile, the skin around his eyes cracking like old paint. "I'm proud of what we've built. I'm even prouder to announce our partnership with Morgan Industries, led by Ms. Elise Morgan. Together, they'll ensure this company remains strong for decades to come." He stepped back, applause polite but shallow. Elise waited a beat, enough to let him sweat, then took his place at the podium. Her gaze swept the crowd. Local reporters, national news crews, a few business analysts who tried to get her on camera for years. This time, they didn't just want her opinion. They wanted to see if she'd gloat. She didn't. "Thank you, Douglas," she said, her tone warm but steady. "And thank you to everyone here today. Sanderson & Co. is more than a brand, it's a legacy. And legacies don't vanish overnight. They evolve." She paused, letting the words settle. Camera zoomed closer. "When we began these talks, I didn't come here to dismantle what the Sanderson family built. I came to strengthen what was left behind. I believe in what happens when tradition meets truth, when old money remembers who laid its bricks and swept its floors." She felt Douglas flinch beside her, though he kept his eyes locked on the stage floor. "This merger isn't about erasing names from buildings," Elise continued. "It's about opening doors that have been shut too long. It's about inviting people in who've waited outside in the rain, at gates that should never have been closed in the first place." Someone in the front row, a young black reporter with a press badge that read Daily Ledger, met her eyes. He didn't nod, didn't smile, but Elise saw it in the way his pen paused mid-scribble. He understood exactly what she meant, even if the cameras never caught it. A question burst from the back. "Ms. Morgan, was this sudden retirement a result of the rumors about the Oak Ridge Country Club incident?" Douglas stiffened. Elise didn't look at him. She kept her smile soft, voice steady. "Business decisions are rarely sudden. And they're never about just one night." Another reporter called out, "Are you planning changes in leadership beyond Mr. Sanderson's retirement?" Elise leaned forward, hands resting lightly on the podium. "Change is inevitable. I don't resist it. I lead it. You'll see that soon enough." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Douglas's mask slipped for half a second, his mouth twitching like he wanted to speak. But Elise placed a gentle hand on his arm, a public gesture of unity that made him look like her elder statesman, not her victim. She turned back to the Chinzidi cameras, letting the moment linger. "Let them wonder who was really in charge. Thank you all for coming," she said. "The work begins now." She stepped back, the polite applause rising like a slow wave. Douglas kept clapping too, a marionette on invisible strings. Backstage, away from the lights, Douglas finally found his voice. "You'll ruin me." Elise didn't look at him as her assistant guided her through the exit door. She spoke over her shoulder, her words almost gentle. "No, Douglas, you ruined yourself. I'm just writing it down." She walked out into the cold winter sun, the clicks of cameras fading behind her like the last echoes of a locked door slamming shut. 2 weeks later, Oak Ridge Country Club buzzed with attention its polished walls hadn't felt in decades. The marble lobby, once a fortress of whispered secrets and silent exclusions, now hosted a different hum, camera crews, folding chairs, and a line of people who'd never stepped through these doors before. At the entrance, Elise stood beside a small podium draped in white linen. She greeted each guest with a nod, young families in second-hand coats, community organizers with clipboards, small business owners clutching printouts of neighborhood maps. Inside the ballroom, the chandeliers blazed like they always had, but tonight the crystal sparkled for a new audience. Waiters drifted through the aisles, not just black waiters this time, but a mix of faces that once would have been turned away at the gate. Bradley Sanderson watched from the far end of the bar. Since his father's retirement, he'd been stripped of his title but kept on as a consultant, a polite word Elise used instead of spectator. He sipped gingerly at sparkling water, eyes darting from the stage to the crowd that would have made his grandfather choke on his cigar. Elise stepped up to the mic, the hum of conversation falling into expectant hush. She didn't tap the mic. She didn't need to. She simply waited until she had the room the same way she'd always taken it, with silence sharpened into steel. "Good evening," she began, voice warm but edged in quiet power. "Tonight we stand inside a building that once decided who did and did not belong, whose voices mattered, whose money counted, whose future could be written in contracts or erased with a whisper." She paused, letting the walls remember every name they'd never said aloud. "But the world outside these gates has changed," Elise continued. "The gates are still here, but we're about to take them off their hinges." A ripple of applause. Some guests hesitated, unsure if clapping in this room would get them thrown out. But Elise's nod made it safe. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. He could see the headlines already. Black CEO turns country club into town hall. It would sting the old members worse than any bankruptcy. Elise raised a hand and the applause softened. She gestured toward a large easel at her side where a new architectural sketch rested. "This place will stay open, but not like this," she said. "The Oak Ridge Club will become Oak Ridge Commons, a community space, a public business hub, open to everyone, owned by everyone who builds here, eats here, speaks here." Murmurs echoed like thunder through velvet curtains. The oldest waiters, standing near the side, exchanged glances, men who'd once been told not to use the front entrance now watching. Elise turned it into a door no one could close. A man in the second row raised his hand, an older black pastor whose congregation had stood on Maplewood Avenue long before luxury condos were a threat. "What about the people who can't afford to come in?" he asked, voice clear but cautious. "You'll let them in for free?" Elise's eyes softened. She stepped down from the podium, crossing the small gap to stand in front of him. She didn't speak into the mic, she spoke directly to him. "This place stole enough from this community. Time to give it back." She turned to the crowd, her voice carrying again. "Oak Ridge Commons won't charge membership fees. It'll host workshops, small business incubators, free legal clinics. The kitchens will feed who needs feeding. The rooms will host who needs a seat." This time, the applause rose like a wave. Even Bradley at the bar had to admit, in some twisted way, it was genius. She wasn't just rewriting the contract. She was rewriting the invitation. Near the back wall, a young woman with a press badge leaned in toward a local news camera. Her whispered summary would roll across 1,000 screens by morning. "The country club that once turned her away, she's turning it inside out." Elise stood quietly as the cheers carried on. She didn't soak it in like a politician. She just let it happen, a storm she'd stirred not with rage, but with calm defiance and open doors. She stepped away from the mic, giving the floor back to the people who'd never been allowed to stand here before. Tonight, they spoke for themselves. The last folding chair scraped across the polished floor like a whisper of ghosts. Elise stood alone in the ballroom, the chandeliers above humming faintly. The town hall had ended an hour ago, but she lingered in the hush, breathing in what the room used to be, tasting what it would become. A single wine glass sat forgotten on a windowsill. She picked it up, thumb smudging away someone's lipstick print. Even the walls felt lighter now, as if each crack in the plaster could finally exhale. Her footsteps echoed as she crossed to the far wall, the same spot where Douglas Sanderson had once leaned back in his leather chair, swirling brandy while telling her she didn't belong here. She could almost hear it again. "We don't sit with people like you." She let the memory pass like a cold draft. She didn't need it tonight. Tonight, the walls were hers. A soft creak of a door snapped her out of it. She turned. Bradley Sanderson stepped inside, hands buried in his pockets. His expensive coat looked too big on him now, like a child wearing his father's armor. "Elise," he said, his voice careful, too careful. "I figured you'd still be here." She didn't respond, just watched him cross the room, shoes tapping on the old parquet floor that had once squeaked under her father's work boots when he fixed the kitchen sink here, back when no one noticed. The black handyman in the back. Bradley stopped a few feet away, glancing at the sketches for Oak Ridge Commons pinned to the wall. "You're really going to tear it all down, huh?" Elise shrugged lightly. "Not tear down, open up." He forced a small laugh, hollow. "You know, there's still time to reconsider. The old members, they're willing to make you an offer. Buy you out, double what the property's worth. Keep it private, quiet." She tilted her head, amused. "So they can lock the doors again?" Bradley shifted his weight, frustration creeping into his polished tone. "Look, Elise, I know my father was who he was, but this place has history, tradition. Some people think you're turning it into a soup kitchen for publicity." She stepped closer, her calm presence stripping away his practiced charm. "Bradley, the only history this place has is keeping people out. My father fixed its pipes, cleaned its drains, and when he was done, they made him leave through the back. That's the history you're asking me to protect." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The silence pressed harder than any words. Finally, he sighed. "I'm just saying you win, okay? You humiliated my father. You humiliated me. You got what you wanted. Why not take the money and walk away?" Elise smiled then, not cruel, not kind, just certain. "Because it's not about money, Bradley. It's about doors." She walked past him, toward the hallway lined with oil paintings of Oak Ridge founders, all pale faces, stiff collars, cold eyes. She paused at the oldest portrait, Douglas's grandfather, the man who'd once rewritten club rules to keep undesirables out. She turned to Bradley. "When your family built this place, they locked it shut. Tonight, I unlocked it. Tomorrow, I'll take the hinges off and leave it wide open. For good." Bradley's shoulders slumped under the weight of a truth money couldn't buy back. He looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, a paper crown in the rain. "Elise." He started again, softer this time. "What do you really want?" She stared at him, past him, at the wall, the paintings, the ghosts. Her father's hands fixing pipes so cold they split in winter. The quiet prayers he'd whisper before knocking on the back door, just to feed his daughter. "I want my father to walk through the front door," she said quietly. "Even if he's gone, the door stays open for the next one." Bradley didn't argue. He just nodded once, a boy who finally understood there was no seat left for him here. She watched him leave, the big doors swinging shut behind him with a final sigh. For a heartbeat, The ballroom felt like the night she'd first been humiliated. Same walls, same air, same soft hum of old secrets, but now the secrets belonged to her. She turned off the lights herself. No staff to shoo her out the side door, no manager pretending not to see. The heavy front doors swung wide as she stepped into the night, a cold wind at her back. And the next morning, waiting like a promise, Douglas Sanderson III sat alone. In the study of his sprawling estate, the curtains drawn tight against the morning sun. The same room where he'd once held court with senators, CEOs, old money donors who'd nod solemnly as he boasted about legacy, tradition, power. Now the room felt smaller somehow, the oil paintings more faded, the Persian rug thin at the edges. The newspaper on his desk trembled slightly under his fingers. The front page was a punch to the gut he couldn't stand up from. Oak Ridge Commons breaks ground, a new door opens for the city. A photo of Elise, hard hat on, shovel in the dirt. Children laughing behind her, neighborhood families standing. Where once only white-gloved waiters had permission to pass. Douglas crumpled the paper and tossed it at the fireplace. But the flames didn't catch. The paper crown refused to burn. At Oak Ridge, scaffolding rose where polished marble once gleamed untouched. Elise stood on a temporary plywood platform, surveying the chaos of new life, painters covering walls in bright colors, workers tearing out the old oak bar, volunteers setting up folding tables for a weekend pop-up food pantry. Her phone buzzed. Her legal advisor's name flashed on the screen. Elise stepped aside into what used to be the coat room, the same room they'd told her to wait in alone the night they humiliated her. "Tell me," she said, voice low. On the other end, the advisor spoke quickly, each word like a hammer. "They're trying to block your permits." Douglas and a couple old donors pooled money. They filed a last-minute injunction. If the judge signs it, the Commons shuts down before it opens. Elise closed her eyes. For a moment, her father's voice flickered through her mind like an old radio. "Fix what's broken. Break what thinks it can't be fixed." She opened her eyes, calm, sharp. "Find the judge. Tell them to expect me." An hour later, Elise walked into the downtown courthouse. No entourage, no lawyer in tow, just her, a thick folder tucked under one arm. Inside the small, wood-paneled hearing room, Douglas sat at the petitioner's table with two stiff lawyers at his side. He didn't look up when Elise entered, or maybe he couldn't. The judge, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, scanned the documents laid out in front of her. "Ms. Morgan," the judge said, "do you have anything to add before I make my ruling?" Elise stepped forward, unfolding a single sheet from her folder. She handed it to the clerk, who passed it up to the bench. "It's a copy of the original Oak Ridge Charter," Elise said, her voice steady. "Buried in the records, never updated. It states clearly that this land was once deeded as a community trust before it was privatized. The original intent was never revoked, only ignored." The judge adjusted her glasses, skimming the yellowed text. Douglas's lawyers leaned in, whispering sharply. Douglas sat still, staring straight ahead, the tips of his ears flushed red. "So if I read this correctly," the judge murmured, tapping the paper, "you're arguing that Oak Ridge doesn't belong solely to Sanderson Holdings, but to the community it was meant to serve?" Elise nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor, and if they want to argue otherwise, they'll have to explain why they hid this document for 70 years. A hush thickened the air. Douglas's lawyer rose too. Object, but Douglas caught his sleeve, stopping him. For the first time, his eyes met Elise's. Two storms caught in a glass room with nowhere to hide. The judge set the paper aside, folding her hands. "Petition denied," she said. "The injunction has no standing. Oak Ridge Commons stays. Open, Ms. Morgan. Good luck." A gavel tapped. The sound cracked something in Douglas's chest that even he couldn't patch over this time. Outside the courthouse, Elise stepped into the sharp wind, the folder still warm in her hand. A local reporter waiting by the steps raised a mic. "Ms. Morgan, any statement about the ruling?" She paused, the old courthouse stone behind her, the city in front of her. "Doors don't close themselves," she said softly. "People close them. Today, we stopped letting them." She walked away without waiting for the follow-up questions, her breath visible in the cold air, each step echoing not just for her, but for every hand that had once knocked and been told to wait outside. The old brass gate at the Oak Ridge entrance no longer squeaked because it was gone. In its place, an arch of fresh wood and brick framed the wide pathway into the commons. Lit by warm lanterns that stayed on all night. It was the grand opening, but there were no red ropes, no clipboards checking names. The only list that mattered was the one Elise carried in her mind. Every name ever turned away, every hand ever slapped down, every knock on a door that never opened. Inside, the ballroom glowed with laughter and music. Long wooden tables replaced velvet ropes. The old portraits were gone, replaced by murals, bold colors and quiet words painted by local artists. A girl danced barefoot across the same floor where waiters once whispered apologies for doors she wasn't allowed through. Elise moved through the room slowly, stopping to greet each person. No microphone this time, no stage. Just her presence, eye to eye, hand to hand. She laughed with a teenager showing off the Commons' new music studio. She leaned down to hear an elderly man explain how the food pantry would deliver groceries to his block every Saturday. Out on the back patio, children played hopscotch where the golf club's smoking lounge used to stand. The same bricks. A new reason to stand on them. Near the old bar, now a community cafe lined with second-hand books and mismatched chairs. Bradley nursed a coffee, invisible in the crowd. He caught Elise's eye from across the room. She walked over, her calm cutting through the noise. "Not staying long?" she asked lightly. Bradley shrugged, his tie loosened. He looked tired, but not angry. Maybe just smaller than this place now. "It's beautiful," he admitted. "Not what my grandfather would have wanted." "That's why it's beautiful," Elise said. He managed a half smile. "What happens now?" Elise glanced at the people. A line for coffee, a workshop. Sign-up sheet pinned to a corkboard, a mural in progress under bright lights. Now they make it theirs. And no one can lock the door again. Bradley nodded, then gestured at the old coat room, now a free legal clinic with 2 young lawyers scribbling notes for a tenant who couldn't pay her rent. He'd hate this part the most, he said, almost to himself. Elise just smiled, her eyes soft but unyielding. "Good." Bradley looked like he wanted to say more, but words failed him. He shook her hand instead, firm, brief, then slipped away into the music and laughter, his silhouette swallowed by a room that no longer had space for kings. Later that night, the last guests lingered in the main hall. Elise stepped out onto the front steps, letting the night air cool her thoughts. Across the street, leaning against a black car, Douglas watched from the shadows. No entourage, no driver, just a man clinging to the last edge of a story that no longer needed him. Their eyes met across the distance. Elise didn't wave, didn't nod. She just stood there, the open door behind her glowing warm against the night. Douglas turned away first, slipping into the car like a ghost retreating to a mausoleum. Inside, one light stayed on in the old kitchen, now a community cafe. Elise slipped behind the counter, rolling up her sleeves. She washed mugs alongside. A young volunteer who looked at her wide-eyed, not quite believing the woman on the news would bother with dirty dishes. She dried her hands, glancing around the cafe. It smelled of strong coffee, warm bread, stories waiting to be told. She reached for a small plaque newly fixed above the counter. She ran her thumb over the engraved words. Fix what's broken. Break what thinks it can't be fixed. Raymond Morgan, her father's words. A promise nailed to the same beams he once mopped under. She unlocked the front door one last time, not because anyone needed to come in tonight, but because it was never meant to be locked again. She stepped. Outside, feeling the wind off the city, same city, new breath. Somewhere down the block, a boy on a bicycle skidded to a stop, peering at the commons. Elise called to him softly, "You hungry?" He nodded. She stepped aside, holding the door wide. He wheeled his bike in, eyes wide at the sight of music. Warm food and people laughing like they'd always belonged here. When the door swung shut behind him, it didn't latch. It never would. Not again.